Hi, and welcome to episode of CineNation. My name is Brandon Sparks.
And I'm Thomas Horton.
And here at CineNation, we love delving into genre and discussing genre history, tropes, and kind of dissecting how these stories are told. And each month we dive into a genre of some kind. Last month we did theater movies, and this month for July, we were kind of thinking of like what really works for summer in July, and the genre we kind of came up with was coming of age movies. And there's so many coming of age movies out there. For the list that we created for this episode, it's our biggest list by far, I think. But anyway, we're covering coming of age movies today. We're going to be doing kind of a brief overview. And so, Thomas, when you think of coming of age movies, like what comes to mind?
I mean, some of my favorites pop up. We've covered some of them recently.
Yeah.
So they're not necessarily on this list, but like The Last Picture Show is one that pops to my mind. Dazed Confused is one that comes to mind, and it usually almost all the ones that I like kind of have to do with like a little bit of a disillusionment with growing up. Definitely Last Picture Show is just like recognizing the just like crushing darkness of adulthood.
Yeah.
But another one I really love is Almost Famous, which is not it's about disillusionment, but not like really losing your spark, just realizing that the things that you maybe like idolized when you were a kid aren't as like important to you as you get older. That's one of my favorites, and that was a movie that I kind of stumbled onto as I was like 14, 15, and so it was one of those. I think a lot of whatever like coming of age movie speaks to you is usually one that you found when you were that age. Like you can still appreciate ones when you're older, but I think the ones that are really going to like stick with you are the ones that hit you when it like really spoke to you.
That's a valid point, because Almost Famous was like that, and American Graffiti, I jumped ahead. Almost Famous is one I saw when I was in high school, like late one night. I think it was like at like 11 o'clock in the evening, and my mom was just like, hey, there's this movie on like HBO that you might like. It's it's this guy it's this kid who's a reporter, or who's a Rolling Stones reporter, and I was like, oh sure, let me turn that on, because like that's how like a lot of stuff would happen, especially on holidays, where like I would be up late. My mom and I are both like night owls, and we'd be in separate rooms, and I would just hear like, hey, there's this movie on HBO, and it's like midnight. I'm like, cool, let me turn this on and watch for 2 hours when I should be going to bed.
Yeah, Almost Famous was funny. When my sister graduated high school, my mom came up with this idea that like what I should give her for a graduation present was just to get like a milk crate and fill it with DVDs of rom-coms, because my sister loved rom-coms. We've talked about this before. And so she sent me, she gave me some money, and I had some of my like own money. I was like 14, and she was like, go to Walmart and just pick out like every rom-com you can find. We're going to fill this crate up and give it to her, and that's going to be your gift to her. So I was like, awesome. So I'm just grabbing stuff off the shelf, and here's this movie with Kate Hudson. And Kate Hudson is like queen of the rom-com. It's like 2006. Like my How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days is like one of my sister's favorite movies. So I grabbed that one, and I put them all in this crate. I gave it to her for graduation. She goes off to college, and she comes back at like Christmas, and it's like, I tried watching this movie and it was awful. You can have it. And like gave me the DVD, and I was like, all right, I'll watch it. And like it just like boom, it became like I watched it like on a monthly basis for like a year after that.
That was your Who album where you put on the candles and listen to it, right?
That was my Tommy.
That was your Tommy. So yeah, that's what we think of coming of age movies, and we're not talking about Almost Famous. Almost Famous is one I thought about doing, but it felt like there were some other films that we could discuss that maybe aren't as talked about, or that kind of establish the genre tropes in some way. I feel like Almost Famous is going to get mentioned at the end of this, of like last mentions. So coming of age movies really don't take off until like the 1950s. There's certain things that are kind of like early examples. Like would you count Wizard of Oz as a coming of age movie?
Yeah, I think so. It's about maturing and learning things about the world. And I think a lot of coming of age movies involve viewing the adults in your life in a different light. A lot of these coming of age movies touch on like coming to recognize the older figures around you in a different way. And that is the heart of Wizard of Oz. for sure, is like all these men in her life, like seeing their flaws and seeing their strengths and all of that.
And then also the importance of like being home, and you could argue nowadays that's like a positive thing of like just staying home and being there, living your life there, going out and exploring. That's kind of the debate of Oz. That would you rather see Dorothy stay in Oz and just live her life there, or go back to Kansas and live on a farm?
Oh man, I read the entire Wicked series. Like the politics in Oz are it's pretty messy. So I don't know if she'd have been happy there.
It should have been great.
Those books go very deep into the political machinations of the land of Oz.
Anyway, we keep going to coming of age instead of tangents like this. But yeah, so the 50s are kind of where it starts to take off. You're seeing film, a lot of them early on, like say Blackboard Jungle, which came out in 1955. They're dealing with more like kind of juvenile delinquents and in some cases lower class characters. It hasn't really defined itself. And then Rebel Without a Cause comes out in 1955 with James Dean. And Rebel Without a Cause is the first film to really examine growing up in like a middle class society where all the characters are two of your three main characters are like in like kind of a traditional family setup, basically with the mother, father, and some siblings. But Rebel Without Cause, it's about this young man, Jim Stark, played by James Dean, who moves to this town with his family, and he's kind of a troublemaker. Basically, his parents, they move from town to town ever so often because Jim is constantly getting in trouble. And so Jim arrives in this town, like I think one of his first nights before even school starts, he gets drunk and gets arrested. And the opening sequence kind of sets up the three main characters: Jim, played by James Dean, Judy, played by Natalie Wood, and then Plato, who's played by Sal Mineo. And all three of these characters are kind of these three troubled youths who all have issues with their parents. With Plato, his parents are absent from his life. Judy kind of has these weird kind of relationships with her parents. Like there's a weird kind of sexual tension between her and her father, which I don't really get. This movie's kind of odd. Like Rebel Without Cause has an odd tone to it. And then you have Jim, who is essentially like upset of what his father has become and how his father has kind of become like emasculated by his mother. And there's weird things of just like, if he just stood up to her one time, like, then it would be good. Like, then I would like finally believe in my father again. So it's these kind of weird.
Also, I'm sorry, I don't like to hold actors like other portrayals against him. There's this whole thing on the internet of it's like, oh, actors in other movies, like Chris Evans is always going to be Captain America, but like his dad is Thurston Howell from Gilligan's Island. Like, it just can't take him seriously. And the cop in this movie is also the chief from Get Smart. Like, those are two shows that I watched all the time as a kid, and that unfortunately that has painted my view of this movie a little bit.
It's interesting because I didn't really love it the first time I watched it, and it hasn't aged wonderfully. But what makes it so interesting is it's its oddness. I think the one thing about, because it's at a point where like it's right at a point where Dean's coming up, Brando's coming up with like the Wild One where he's on the motorcycle, and then you have like Elvis about to hit pop culture. Like, basically masculinity is kind of changing in pop culture at this point, and everything's kind of becoming younger, and adults don't really understand what's happening to kids. Like, rock and roll music is like turning them bad and things like this, and it's the movies that are kind of promoting this juvenile delinquency. And Rebel Without Cause is kind of the first one to try to tackle like what kids are feeling. And I think that's why it's important, is because a lot of teens weren't having movies really made for them like this. Like I was, when reading researching like Natalie Wood for this, she was talking about how her parents, especially her mother, was kind of in control of her career, and she read the script from Rebel Without Cause and didn't want her to make it because it made parents look bad. Mm-hmm. And Natalie Wood's like, no. This is how I'm feeling right now in my life. I want to like, this is the one I want to make.
Yeah, and I mean it does present a more complicated idea of like teens and especially masculinity. I mean, it's the guys all wear their leather jackets and drive the cars and have their switchblades, but they also just the idea of like how much time they spend on their hair, or the fact that like James Dean is not afraid to cry in front of people, like was huge. It was like this weird mix of like alpha male, but also like very emotionally vulnerable that, you know, men weren't allowed to show their emotions before this.
Yeah. And then you have someone like Plato, who's played by Sal Mineo, who's like, at the moment, I don't know people read it this way, but when you watch it now, he's a gay character.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a scene where when Dean takes him home, he's like, "Oh, do you want to like come inside? Like no one's home. I'm not that tired. You want to hang out and do some stuff?" It's very like, and he's doing it in a very like, I don't say flirtatious way, but it's a very like trying to seduce Dean in a weird way.
Yeah,
I mean, how he's doing it.
I'm sure, knowing what we know now about Hollywood at the time, I'm sure that was intentional. It was just like you had to, you know, it was all about subtext during the Hayes era.
Yeah.
But
they're portraying it as like, oh, he doesn't have any family. It's like he just wants to be friends with someone. But like his jealousy towards Natalie Wood is like very apparent when like Dean is like trying to essentially hook up with Natalie Wood, and Plato is kind of off to the side. Like, no. Like I saw this guy first. Like I want to be with this guy. And yeah, it was important at the time too, because like Dean was on the rise after East of Eden. And I think this was supposed to be like just another like B movie picture shot in black and white. But Dean became huge with East of Eden. They changed it to where it was shot in color and became an A picture, and they shot it in CinemaScope, which was big at the time, where it's this huge kind of widescreen format that was trying to come in because TV was putting people in their homes and not going to theaters, so things like CinemaScope were invented. And so Rebel Without a Cause became this huge film, and kind of for kids in the 50s, kind of became the movie of their generation. I mean, I know some people who hate this movie. I know our friend Mark, who was in the 100th episode, we didn't put this out there, but Mark hates Rebel Without a Cause. And he's like, this is the first movie I watched that he's like, I didn't get. Like, I didn't like see the purpose for it. Why it's important. And I would understand that. And I thought that way for a bit, but then rewatching it this time, you can see what it's doing. And it kind of establishes the tropes that we're going to talk about of like conflicts with parents. I would also like sexual repression in a way with Plato's character, and then also like sexual awakening in some way with like Dean and Wood kind of having a thing. I'm glad that we watched Giant recently, because that has really changed the way that I view James Dean. I see what, you know, Kazan was the one who kind of discovered Dean, and so that's why he and Brando are often kind of compared, because he discovered Brando as well. And you can see, you know, Kazan loves this like just pure untapped like emotion in these people, you know, and that's what Brando started as, and Brando, you know, over his career molded it into something very refined, sometimes perhaps a little too refined by the end of his career. But I wish it is a shame that he died so young, because just the improvement from this movie to Giant is incredible. Yeah.
He has some really good moments in this movie, but then there's other times where you're just like, that's too much, man. Like when I'm sorry, spoil. We won't spoil it. You know, this is one of the broad strokes episodes at the end of the film. At the end of the movie, he has this scene where he's like on the ground and like clutching at his father's pants, and he's like, help me, and it's like, okay, all right, James, we get it, you're sad. Like,
all right, James,
you know, and it's something like acting takes progress, and with someone like this who was just plucked up, and then it was like, boom, giant movie, boom, literally giant movie, and then that's the end of your career. Like, you don't have time to hone your craft as well. But yeah, I mean, you can see why he's magnetic in this movie, but he's still very raw, I think. Yeah. And Giant feels much more like he's finally got a grip on what he's doing. So it's kind of a shame that this has become, I think, with the jacket and, you know, there's a statue at Griffith Park Observatory dedicated to this movie and to him. Like, this is what he's known for, I think. But I was very impressed with Giant when we watched it a couple months ago.
I love how this just turned like, well, this is okay, but Giant's really
no.
great.
I mean, I think that's what I take away from it. And you know, speaking to Mark's notes, I do think, you know, the background of this movie was it was written based on a psychology book about teenagers. Like, that's where it came from. And
that's the title came from. Yeah.
But it, you know, it was inspired by this, like, what's up with teenagers these days? So it does kind of sometimes, it feels like an adult trying to, you know, some of these movies feel like very authentic to what being a teenager is. And obviously this movie touched on something that, like, a lot of kids were like, oh, that is what I feel like now. But it does sometimes feel like this is an adult looking and like, what are these kids doing these days, racing fast cars? And so I think there is just something when you watch it that feels like a little bit off. And I think part of that is his performance. When you watch it and you kind of go, this guy, like, you can see the charm, you can see the charisma, but if this was the only movie you watch, I think this is the least of it. I think he's better in East of Eden than he is in this. So I think this is kind of like the least of his performances. So it can be kind of shocking if you watch this. If you're like, oh, I kind of want to look into the legend of James Dean, and this is the only one you watch, you can kind of come away with it being like, huh.
You bring up a good point with this movie about how it feels like it's written by an adult about kids. And I agree with you completely. That was the note I wrote down when I started watching American Graffiti. Is that it feels like American Graffiti is written by someone who lived through this specific era of time for this coming of age story. When Rebel Without Cause feels like adults trying to say, like, hey, how do we get to the kids and, like, appeal to them to make money? So American Graffiti feels like it's of that era and from a person who would be driving those cars and cruising on a Saturday night. When Rebel Without Cause is, like, probably written by the parents who are trying to understand their kids. So you had never seen American Graffiti before this?
Yep, that's correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about it, like what it's about, but then also your thoughts on it?
So it's the last night of, like, summer, I'm guessing because they're talking about school starting, like, next week. So it's the last night of summer in this town, in like a kind of small town in California, and it's about a group of friends who are mostly just graduated high school, just spending the night out on the strip, driving around in cars. And two of them are supposed to go off to college the next day, and the rest are going to stay in this town. And it's just kind of about, you know, the hijinks. What happens when you're just driving around town with nothing planned. Yeah,
and you have the two guys who are the college kids who are played by Ron Howard and Richard Dreyfuss, and then you have kind of the drag racer who's kind of this, like, James Dean surrogate. And we'll discuss that a little bit, I think, in here. And then you have kind of the nerdy character as well, who's the can't get the girls and, like, drives like a Vespa or whatever. Like, he drives like a motor, he's just like, oh yeah, he didn't have a car. So anyway, I've always loved this movie. So Thomas, what were your thoughts on American Graffiti?
I really enjoyed it. It was really fun, man. I love Dazed and Confused, and I think Dazed and Confused is almost like a sequel. It's American Graffiti in a different time. American Graffiti is set in the 1950s. Dazed and Confused is set in the 70s, but it's just about, like, cruising around with your friends, which feels the most realistic to my high school experience to, like, any movies that are out there. That's what we did. You know, it's funny. Yesterday I was driving. I had to go pick up some furniture from my parents' house, and I was driving up to my hometown, and I drove through it. I had a song playing on my iPod, and I realized that, like, from one end of town to the other end of town only took one song. And I was like, how did I ever listen to music as a teenager? Because this was like, that was my excuse, was just, like, driving around town and listening to music. But, like, one song for the whole town? Like, how did I ever listen to anything? Yeah, that's literally this movie is about, like, 50s car culture. And you literally, even more so than Dazed and Confused, I think you had the drive-ins for, like, burgers and stuff, and then you just, like, drove up and down the main strip of the town, and that was what everybody did, and you kind of hopped around the cars. and hung out with your friends who had cars. Like if you didn't have a car, you'd hop from one to the other kind of thing.
Where you have John Milner, who's kind of the car dude, where he says at one point, he's just like, yeah, the strip's getting smaller. And Milner is kind of this character where he's like of a different era. So that's what's happened. It's a weird thing where it's like it feels like the 50s, but it's right at the tail end of kind of that era, because it takes place in 1962. Because the whole tagline of the movie was like, where were you in 1962? Because it's right before Kennedy gets shot, a year before that, and kind of before Vietnam War is like taking over the culture, which is why, and there's ending titles to this movie that are kind of like, can be a little jarring if you don't know they're coming.
Yeah.
Like where it's just like, this happens, this
pretty much everybody's dead.
Yeah. So one person's dead, one person goes to Vietnam and gets lost, or basically it goes missing in action. And then one's a writer, and then one's an insurance like agent. They delve more into that into the sequel, more American Graffiti. Yeah, American Graffiti kind of establishes, I don't know if it was the first one to do this, but I feel like it establishes the decision to go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Like it comes out in 1973, and you have the Richard Dreyfuss character. You have Richard Dreyfuss who's Kurt, and Ron Howard who's Steve, and Kurt and Steve are going off to school. But at the beginning of the movie, Kurt is having second thoughts about going. When Steve is like, no, we're going, man. Like, we're going to college. I'm breaking up with my girlfriend so that we can have fun in college. And like, you're going to see kind of these two characters like maybe start to have different views of it, because Steve is still kind of living in the moment of the town when Kurt is as well, but like he's reflecting on it, if that makes sense. Like I love this movie, like we're talking about, it has this kind of cruising culture, and it adds into, I think, one big part of it that becomes important. Well, Last Picture Show does as well, but like the importance of a soundtrack. Mm-hmm. We were talking about music, of like how did I listen to music growing up in the small town, when like music can kind of date a movie in a good way and in a bad way. But American Graffiti does it in a good way because it's kind of a timestamp of that era.
Yeah, and it's just constant. It never feels like a needle drop, because it's all diegetic. It's all like coming from car speakers, and it's just always there. But yeah, it absolutely, if you live through that period, it drops you right back there. If you didn't live through that period, you still have we all know kind of the music of that era, even if you don't listen to like doo-wop and that sort of thing. It's still, you're aware of it, and it really helps to like build out that world. I read it was one of like the most profitable movies of all time, because it was shot for like $700,000 and netted like 150 million or something like that. It was crazy. Yeah. So I mean, all you need is like literally all you really had to do is like pay for all those cars, and pay for all that music, and boom, you've got your setting. Like that is, and I mean, a lot of California towns still to this day kind of look like the 50s, because that's when most of California was like built. So yeah, it's really effective in like dropping you right back in that period, and you're like, yeah, this is it, I'm here. And that's exactly what we've talked about Dazed and Confused does. It is of that time. It's not about that time.
Like you're saying, it's not used as like a needle drop. It's you. Lucas has said it in one of the videos of how he used music as sound effects, and sound effects to create drama, which is the opposite of what you usually do. Is you use like a score to build tension, to build drama, and sound effects are just a part of the world. And he kind of flips it. Mm-hmm. And so when he takes out the music in scenes, that's when like there's tension in the scene. And the other thing too, you're talking about just like cruising around. It's one of these movies where like it's a coming of age film with very low stakes.
Yeah, and so you never feel like, because the stakes are low, you never feel like you're getting hit over the head with the lessons that everybody's learning as much as something like Rebel Without a Cause. But everybody does learn like really good, like there's a lot of good character growth, and there's a lot of great lessons. I think the character in the Hot Rod is John has one of the best kind of arcs in that, because he is like he's all about just cruising the strip, racing, and like hitting on girls, and he's hitting on some girls and says like, hey, why don't you come get in my car? And so this like really young, like 13-year-old girl comes and gets in. And she's like, okay. And she comes and hops in his car. And he's like disgusted because, and I mean, this is going like way deep into it, but I think it's that kind of thing where he's someone who views like women as objects. And so like he doesn't even feel the need to be around a 12-year-old girl because he can't hook up with her. And by the end of the movie, like they become very good friends, and he like very obviously cares about her as a person. And you know, it's about expanding your horizons and like figuring out how to relate to people, because especially as a teenager it can be kind of hard to relate to people. And I think that's and it never like hits you over the head with like this guy hates women and like he only views them as like sex objects, and it never hits you over the head with any of that. But by the end of the movie you can see a very obvious growth in this person.
And it's you bring up a good point with that, because then the flip side is the Harrison Ford character. Who is the dude who's coming into town to face John in a drag race, and every time you see his character, he has a different woman in there, a different girl, like every time, and you're just like, is he just like dropping him off like every hour if they're like not like pleasing him in some way? He's
like the Bizarro, where we come to see him as like the dark side of John, like and then he ends up crashing his car in the end, and John like has this moment where he's like, my life could go that way. I need to change. I need to make some changes. Also, love this. I read this. So I was doing some research. I did some independent research. Like, I think everybody knows Harrison Ford was Coppola's carpenter, and got into this movie through that way. But I love this. They offered him $450 for a week's worth of shooting, and he said, I can make more doing carpentry work, no thank you. So then they said, how about 500? And he said, yeah. So somewhere within that $50 range was what he was making a week doing carpentry work. But then he said, I'm not cutting my hair for like a 60s style. So they were like, all right, here's a cowboy hat.
I read like apparently like it was because they went through multiple locations, because apparently like they were in one city in California. They were there. A key member of production got arrested for growing marijuana. And the city was upset with how it was like hurting local businesses. So they told them they had to leave. They went to a different city. But at one point, just the weird stories with speaking of Harrison Ford got thrown out of the hotel they were staying at because they were so rowdy. So it was Paul LeMat, who plays John Milner, was sent to a hospital after allergic reaction to walnuts, apparently. LeMat and Ford and Bo Hopkins, who plays one of the like kind of...
Yeah, the Pharaohs.
They were claimed to be drunk most nights and every weekend, and had conducted climbing competitions to the top of the local Holiday Inn sign where they were staying. One actor set fire to Lucas's motel room. And then LeMat also threw Richard Dreyfuss into a swimming pool at the hotel, gashing Dreyfuss's forehead on the day before he was due to have close-ups filmed.
So this is like the dark side of when Linklater famously like made the whole cast stay in a hotel and hang out with each other, and there aren't really any stories of anything going wrong in that one, but
well, this is just like
this
them
is just the way it could go.
This is the way it could, like they're having fun, but like everyone's just doing like.
Well, and that would have been like the drinking and the carrying on would have been during the day, because this movie was like almost entirely night shoots, right?
All at night, yeah. It's like, I don't know, like. I mean, what's your cover set? Like, what's like...
You just... Harrison Ford just out climbing the Holiday Inn and like middle of the day, just wasted.
But yeah, so you're talking about the money they would have lost. Coppola said he was always upset he didn't pay for this movie himself, because he would have made like $30 million, which is the equivalent of $173 million today. Just on like production, just on box office. The movie ended up grossing like almost $400 million in box office gross and home video sales.
But I do think this is something we'll see a lot in these movies, is studios often underestimate the power of like really touching on a teenage audience. It's something they're always like trying to get, but whenever a movie comes along that does it really well, the studios are always like, I don't know if the teens are really going to respond to that, and then it does. I feel like it's always this flip side. You get these teen movies that they're like, the kids are going to love this, and then they flop. And then you'll get movies like this where the studio was from everything you read, the studio was constantly like, what is this? We have no idea what this is. Yeah. What are we supposed to do with this? And then it was huge.
Yeah, it was like basically they tried to like, they basically said, we're going to recut it with someone else because we don't like this. But Godfather came out or won the Oscar for Best Picture, and they're like, well, crap, now we have to listen to what Coppola says, because Coppola's the producer of this, and he's basically saying, look, we're sticking with what Lucas does. Did you have any favorite scenes from this movie that, like...
I kind of loved all the stuff with Richard Dreyfuss and the Pharaohs. It was such a funny little like branch for his character to go in. Like they originally approach him because he's sitting on the car of one of the Pharaohs on the hood, and he's dented it. So then they're like, you got to come with us. And it turns into this thing where by the end of like the night, they're like begging him to be in the gang, and he's like, I don't know, guys, I might go to college tomorrow. And they're like, no, come on,
like, you have so much fun.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of because this movie was like Happy Days like came out of this in a way. Like, a lot of Happy Days you can see inspired by this movie, and like that there's a lot of the Fonz in the John Milner character, but I think there's a lot of the Fonz in Bo Hopkins' character. He's like the leader of this gang, and he's this greaser, and you think he's scary, and by the end of the movie he's just like a big softy kind of thing. And they have this like running gag where they keep threatening to like drag him behind their car. And then by the end they're all best buds.
They're just like, he's like, do you know this guy? He goes, yeah, we know that guy. We killed him last night. Yeah. It's just...
yeah. That whole sequence is really fun. And that's, Richard Dreyfuss really thrives in like being, uncomfortable. Like that's his sweet spot, is like being somewhere he shouldn't kind of thing. And so he's really fun in that. And then I love the Wolfman Jack sequence is a lot of fun. And Wolfman Jack is awesome in it. Kind of as the mentor role who really helps to like change Kurt's mind.
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's the moments that really work are these kind of like quiet moments with Kurt, where it's like when he's watching Wolfman Jack and the like doing the radio broadcast, or when he's like listening, when he's like waiting for the phone call at the end at the drive-in, like or at the drive-through. Like he just his stuff is probably the best stuff. And he's not back in the sequel, More American Graffiti. That's the big kicker, is that Kurt...
Spielberg had already snapped him up at that point.
Yeah, Dreyfuss had got too big at that point, apparently.
Yeah, this is one of those... I love when you look into the film, perhaps, the way everyone, like, shared everybody else around. Like, De Palma was like, Scorsese, you gotta look at this De Niro guy, and it just all, like, mixes around like that. Yeah. And then Lucas has Dreyfuss, and Spielberg, like, he becomes the Spielberg, like, stand-in, like, for, the first couple of movies of Spielberg's big career.
So is it in the pantheon of Dazed and Confused and like Last Picture Show?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's great. Like we said, I think low stakes are key here. I think there's this weird thing when you are a teenager, everything feels so heightened, but it's not for the most part. Like, something as I think that's the key, is like when you're older and you're writing these movies about being a teenager, you think like, oh, you got to have stakes because movies have to have stakes. Yeah. And what you forget is like just how important, like if you're John in this movie, finding out that someone in the town has a faster car than you, just how important that is to you when you're a teenager. Like that is huge. That is everything. So you don't need, like if we're talking Rebel Without a Cause, you don't need gunfights with the cops and driving off of a cliff. Like just needing to beat that guy on the strip tonight, like that is everything when you're a teenager. So the stakes are already so heightened when you're that age that like I think that the key to really making an authentic teen movie is like keeping the stakes low, because you just feel everything so much more when you're a teenager.
But anyway, moving on to the next film. Horror enters the coming of age genre with Carrie. So can you tell us a little bit about Carrie? Brief summary.
Yeah, so Carrie's based on a Stephen King novel. It was kind of his like the novel that like really made him and established him as like a horror king. But it's Sissy Spacek as this teenager. She's very sheltered. Her mom is super Christian, and so she hasn't like educated her on puberty basically. And it opens with Carrie has her first period in the school locker room, and all the girls tease her about it. And all the other girls get in trouble for it. And so then it starts this thing. They're like, we got in trouble because of Carrie, so we're going to get back at her. And I assume it's now iconic scene. They play a prank on her where they elect her homecoming queen and dump a bucket of pig's blood over her head. But what they don't realize is, along with hitting puberty, she has developed telekinesis, and she uses it to murder everyone in the school. So yeah, it's a very, very overt metaphor for puberty, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely like a coming of age movie. Definitely about it turns the idea of going through puberty and becoming adult into something terrifying, which I'm sure is. I mean, that's the thing. Like we were talking about, everything's heightened when you're a teenager. It is terrifying.
Yeah.
So it really uses the like lens of horror to show exactly what it feels like to be that age and to be bullied and all of that, and it just kind of heightens it to an absurd level.
And how do you feel about De Palma there, Thomas?
I mean, De Palma is a for better or for worse. De Palma is a director who just goes for it.
Yeah.
And this movie has some like really strange stuff to it. The score is like really like beautiful.
Yeah.
And then it'll just like cut to like basically psycho strings every once in a while. It'll just be like this really like lighthearted score, and then it'll just like cut.
Yeah.
And then it's like terrifying. And then he just does stuff like, I mean, he shoots most of the Carrie murdering everyone is just shot in split screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's another, we just talked about Lucas. He's another film brat. And this is definitely like his style, and I think he kind of came to refine it a little bit later on in his career, and then it kind of got a little out of control after that.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's always someone who is like, you watch it and you're like, this is De Palma. Like that's just kind of his thing.
And Carrie is the one that kind of put him on the map in terms of like box office. Like it was a huge success.
Yeah, and it's a pretty small movie, mostly unknown actors. It's not huge in scope or anything. And it's not, I mean, as far as a horror movie goes, it's pretty slow burn. Like nothing.
It is.
It just kind of feels like a teen movie until that bucket of blood is dumped on her head, and then it's like boom, horror movie. And there's nothing leading up to it. There's no jump scares or anything like leading up to it.
It's more just this like, I mean, her mother, who's played by Piper Laurie, is like very just like, maybe it gets crazier at the end of it after the prom scene happens. Yeah, it's like no one talks about anything in between Carrie, the opening and then the dance sequence when blood's poured on her. Like there's no one talks about anything in between. It's
just kind of played like a high school movie then. She's she's shy, she's got this teacher who's like trying to pull her out of her shell. This boy has asked her out to prom. Her mom's against it, but this teacher is like really trying to encourage her. It's very much just kind of a high school movie, and then it's like boom, high school is horrifying.
So what tropes kind of pop up in this movie? Like you have the parental conflict with the mother.
Yeah, it's interesting. I watched a couple of these today, and my girlfriend was kind of coming in and out, and she made a note. She was like, I've never noticed before, but a lot of coming of age movies are either don't have parents involved whatsoever or very much reliant on your relationship with your parents. Like American Graffiti, we don't see anybody's parents
until the very end when
but Carrie is very much about her relationship with her mother, and this idea that like if her mother had let her grow up like a normal girl, none of this would have happened. She's constantly asking her mom, just let me be like everyone else, and her mom refuses. But what the kids at school just think she's strange. They don't realize that it's her mom holding her back.
Yeah.
And I think it touches on kind of this idea of like the popular kids. I think it's one of the first movies that we see in this trope really establish like the divide between the cool kids and the not cool kids, which is going to be something that becomes huge in this genre later on.
Yeah. And because like with American Graffiti, real quick, back to that, because I didn't bring it up, it's like the like there's no divide. Like you have this nerdy guy who's like good friends with this like cool like drag racer basically.
Yeah.
But with this, it's like there is a class structure to the high school system, and Carrie's the one that's really showing that. Our last film of the 70s we're going to talk about is Breaking Away. And Breaking Away is about these 4 young boys who have graduated high school. It's the end of the summer, also kind of like American Graffiti. And they live in a college town. And this is one of the few movies that I think tackles the world of a college town, especially from like the townies perspective. So all 4 of these guys are townies, and they're all like, they have kind of no purpose in life, and they're bullied by the college students. They call them cutters because in this city in Bloomington, Indiana, where they're at, is that their fathers or the previous generations of their town were stone cutters and worked in the quarries and like their limestone industry. And so the students make fun of the kids for that, even though the kids have nothing to do with that. But stars Dennis Christopher, who's also he's the lead character, is that he is obsessed with Italian cycling and like wants to be a famous cyclist, and he like speaks in an Italian accent, and his father's played by Paul Dooley, who's just like phenomenal in this role. And his other friends are Dennis Quaid, who is kind of
he's a hothead.
He's the hothead. Like he's kind of I don't want to say James Dean, but he's kind of he's the cool one of the group, but also the one who's like very self-aware that like he's going nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have Jackie Earle Haley, who's kind of the small kid of the group who kind of get picked on by people.
And he's the only one who was actually a teenager when they shot this, right?
I think so.
Yeah, I think he was like 19, and everybody else was like late 20s. But you can tell, you can see it.
Yeah, and they use it to where like he's always trying to like prove his masculinity in a way. Like he's the one that's always lifting weights a lot, I think. And anytime someone calls him short, no matter who it is, he's just like wants to fight or something. Mm-hmm. And then you have Daniel Stern, who's like kind of the weird. He's not the oddest character of the group, but he kind of has just these like weird tendencies. They're just like he's talking in like voices occasionally, and he talks about. He's a character who doesn't have a relationship with his father, where he's kind of unfocused because he kind of blames his father for always just like saying good job no matter what he does. So anyway, it's an interesting film because it's a coming of age film, but also a little bit of a sports film in the last third act of the film, where it becomes this huge cycling competition. Anyway, Thomas, you never seen this movie. What were your thoughts on Breaking Away?
Yeah, it's very unique. It's a unique movie.
Yeah,
I've never seen anything like it. It does kind of like we talked about a lot, like the first 2 acts of the movie feel very low stakes. Like it does kind of meander in the way that I think we both really like in teenage movies. It feels similar to like teenage life. They go out swimming in the quarry. They've got occasional run-ins with the cool college kids. Shout out Hart Bachner from Die Hard, plays the like lead prep. Love that. But yeah, then the end just turns into this like super high stakes bicycling montage, which is kind of strange. It was a little bit of a tone shift. And also I don't know if someone who is aware of like Indiana culture in 1979 would tell me if it's accurate that like everyone in the town would be super into cycling.
Apparently, yes.
Because like I don't know, it's weird because it's supposed to be weird how much he's into it, but then when it comes time for these races, like everyone in town is into it. And this fraternity has a cycling team. I don't know, but all the guys in it are really fun. Like they've got really good chemistry. Yeah, it was a fun movie. I don't know that it hits the pantheon for me of like ones I would keep coming back to. And honestly, I do think it's because the stakes get so ramped up in the end there. Like the ones that I really find easy to like come back to are the ones that are very low stakes.
Okay.
And you watch it for the people, you watch it for the dialogue, and the first half of this movie feels kind of like that. And then it goes so much into like rewatching it, like I know how the race is going to go. Like I could see it being something I watch and then like I rewatch and then turn off before the like bike race part. I don't know.
Well, I love the bike race actually because I don't know, it feels like what it could happen is that he does the bike race all by himself. Because that's what his friends want him to do. Like, yeah, we can't do this.
It's meant to be a relay, but they're like, hey, man, we'll all pretend to be your relay partners, and then you just do it yourself.
And then they all kind of have to step up in the last minute to like help him when he gets injured. And and you're kind of seeing like all of them finding purpose finally in their life in some way, even just for a brief moment. I don't know. I love the race. I think Peter Yates directed it, shoots this film beautifully. Mm-hmm. Like the way he stages them, even the race is great, but the way he stages them in like the scenes when they're at the quarry, Like they're like they're almost like paintings where you have people he has people in like the foreground, the midground, the background, and they're like just wonderful still images of these characters. And I think their chemistry is phenomenal.
Yeah, everybody's really good in it. Yeah, I don't know. It just maybe it's one that I need to rewatch at some point. But like, it didn't on the first watch. It didn't like hit me as like, wow, this is a classic coming of age movie.
Well, what I love about that I want to bring up. We're talking about the parental relationship, and this is very apparent in this film where it's like, it's not the racing that I think bothers them. It's that he's speaking in an Italian accent.
His dad's just like, you're American. This is my cat. My cat is American. Don't give it an Italian name.
He's like, I don't want this Italian food. Where's my French fries? I want American
I don't want zucchini.
Food.
Zucchini's Italian food. Yeah.
No, Paul Dini is great in this movie, but what it does that I think is so interesting and different for this era, where you have this conflict of the parents of like them fighting back, but you have this scene once Dennis Christopher realizes like he's idolized this Italian racing team and he's facing them in this like local competition, and he realizes that they're kind of, I think you're talking about we talked about Almost Famous, where like you realize the things that weren't important to you or that you were important to you at a certain age aren't as important to you, and in a way you've idolized a certain thing, like the way the character in Almost Famous idolizes the bands that he worships or that he listens to, and with Dennis Christopher's character, he's worshiping the Italian cycling team, and then he finally meets them, and they're like not good people. They they wreck his bike, and he's just kind of like, oh, and that's when like he kind of shifts, and the father sees it. And there's a beautiful scene when Paul Dooley takes him to like some like I think like a library or someplace, when he's talking about when he used to be younger and used to be like a stone cutter. And what's so unique is that this film kind of establishes the whole like the parent doesn't want the kid to become them. Like with Rebel Without Cause, even King Creole, the Elvis Presley movie we've talked about occasionally on here, where like the kids are always fearing they're gonna become their parents. And with Breaking Away, it kind of establishes this trope of the parents wanting to do more for their kids so they don't become them.
Yeah. And I think you do see a lot too. I think what his character kind of goes through is realizing that there's and you see this a lot, this arc for adults a lot in the coming of age movie, is like there's a difference between like wanting success for your kid and like wanting the best for your kid. Like, yeah, like I think this idea that like when you have a kid and you decide to be this type of parent and you set goals that you want your kids to accomplish, and at a certain point you do have to like take stock and be like, do I need to change these goals that I set? And a lot of times we see these parents who like hold on to the goals that they've always envisioned for their kids, and then that leads to like, it kind of drives a block in between them. And that's kind of what he has, this realizing that like wanting the best for your kid can mean helping them achieve their own goals. And I think that's what he hits here. And that I do think that's something you see a lot in these movies, is the parents being like, I wanted you to do this and this and this, and then by the end realizing that like, you know, their kid being happy is the most important thing or whatever.
And we're moving into the 80s. We're not going to cover a movie in the 80s on this episode, and the reason why we're going to be doing a John Hughes episode at the end of the month. And I feel like John Hughes is going to cover a lot of the 80s coming of age movies, but in the 80s there was this huge boom, and you're having things like John Hughes, you're having the beginnings of, say, like Amy Heckerling with Fast Times at Ridgemont High, or Cameron Crowe with things like Say Anything, and Footloose even. Like, you're getting a lot of different stuff, but we're going to come back to that later on in the month when we talk about John Hughes, because he has so many films that came out in the 80s. Yeah. So we're gonna move on to the 90s. Hopefully you're still listening after we just told you we're not talking about the 80s. But we're going to move on to the 90s, and we're going to talk about a film called Can't Hardly Wait. Thomas, what is Can't Hardly Wait about?
Can't Hardly Wait is about a house party the night of high school graduation, and it's about a bunch of different people at this party. And I think it is it's kind of like Days Confused. It's one of those movies that like you go back and watch and you're like, oh my gosh, I know every single person in this movie down to like people that don't even have lines.
Yeah.
And it's kind of wild to like go back and see it as like this time capsule of like the late 90s like freshman class basically.
Yeah.
But the lead character is played by Ethan Embry. You've got Seth Green in a supporting role. You've got Lauren Ambrose in a supporting role. Peter Facinelli for the Twilight fans out there. And then Jennifer Love Hewitt as so the Ethan Embry's storyline is that he's had a crush on Jennifer Love Hewitt for all of high school, and she is like the most popular girl in school, and she's just been dumped by her boyfriend or just broke up with her boyfriend. It's not really clear at first, but they're broken up, and he's decided at this party he's going to try and win her over. But what he doesn't realize is everyone else in the school is also trying to win her over that night.
Yeah, weirdly when watching this, and I don't want to sound like a creep because Ethan Embry's character gets a little like weird, and like how he's like stalking people or not stalking.
Ethan Embry. Here's the thing: Ethan Embry is a fantastic character actor that I think for a little while people tried to make a leading man, and his eyes are too crazy to be a leading man. I'm sorry. In the very end, there's this part in the very end when there's just cutting back and forth between like close-up coverage of the two of them when they're about to kiss, and they like cut back to him, and his eyes are just like wild. And I'm like, Amanda, do not kiss him.
Yeah, it's so. But I will say this. You've said this before. You're like, Brandon, are you Ethan Embry? The way like, because Jennifer Love Hewitt was like my early crush growing up. So this movie was like a big favorite of mine as a kid. And there's stuff that Ethan Embry says like, oh man, I kind of thought that way in high school. Like there was parts where like, it's not as creepy like, oh dude, she's eating the same Pop-Tart as me. But I would be like, there's no such thing as a coincidence. This is happening for a reason. Yeah. I would be that to my friends.
This Barry Manilow song is playing on the radio. That means I have to talk to her.
That might be more like, and like I would get that, but like the whole like we eat the same Pop-Tart, no, get the hell out of here with that. Like it'd be like the same, like someone watches the same movies I love. I've never met someone like that. We're meant to be together. Oh, I was a weird high school kid. But yeah, that's a little bit relatable of like, I think he does it for way too long and has some weird tendencies with it. But that part is kind of like, oh, the girl, like finally, like the girl that you've loved or you've liked the entire high school career, your last night in town is now like single, and you think like, oh, like if I tell her how I really feel about her, she's gonna like me. I don't know how believable it is that she doesn't know who he is. Mm-hmm. Like that wasn't my high school. Like I pretty much knew everyone in my high school. Maybe I'm just like I'm from a weird, like that's just weird to have. But like, if they were in so many classes together, I never get in these like teen movies how they don't recognize each other when they go to the same school. It just bothers me. Sorry, that's a random tangent. What were your thoughts on rewatching Can't Hardly Wait?
Yeah, so this is one of those movies. Comedy Central used to show this movie constantly.
I think,
and it's one of those that I've seen so many times, but maybe only seen the first scene like twice. You know, it's like I've never sat down and been like, I'm gonna watch Can't Hardly Wait, but I turn it on when it's on television, and I know it super well. But I love it from like a casting standpoint, just because it is like one of the most insane ensembles I think ever. Like just the most like. These people got like one line, and every time I come back to this movie I like recognize someone new, and I could just sit here and like list everyone, and there's some people who are like already famous when they got cameos, like Melissa Joan Hart was Melissa Joan Hart, and they gave her like a cameo role. But I mean, you got Donald Faison, you've got Jamie Presley, and then you start going like deeper into it. You got Chris Owen, who's the Shermanator in American Pie, like 2 years later.
He's just stealing stuff in the background.
He has no lines. He's just this like running visual gag that he keeps like stealing stuff in the background. But I mean, even stuff like Eric Balfour. Eric Balfour from 6 Feet Under.
Okay.
Is the guy that like licks the weed brownie off of her face.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I didn't want to waste any. He's got like 2 lines.
Yeah.
Jason Segel.
Jason Segel pops up.
Oh, Jason Segel. and the other guy in that scene with Jason Segel went on to be like a recurring character on Frasier. And I think he's on Bones now. I'm pretty sure that guy's on Bones.
And then who's the next person you said?
Sarah Rue.
Sarah
Rue plays the like hippie girl, and she went on to have like a very successful TV career.
Less Than Perfect, right? That was her show.
Yeah. The weirdest one I picked out this time that I had never even noticed before is there's a scene when, all right, so shout out also, Charlie Corsimo plays this nerd who's like gonna decide he's gonna get revenge on the jocks at this movie. Shout out Charlie Corsimo is like the king of like acting was fun, but I want to like have a career, like just dropped it at like the height, like Hook. What about Bob?
Big Gap. Can't hardly wait.
And then just like, I'm out. This was fun, guys. I'm gonna go be a lawyer. Like, but the one I noticed this time, so there's this part where he becomes like very popular, and he's like, there's a scene where like 3 girls like pull him into the bathroom, and this other girl goes like, oh, did I just see them go into the bathroom with like whatever his name is? And they're like, yeah. And she's like, oh, lucky. She plays Russell's wife in Almost Famous, like Billy Crudup's wife, in Almost Famous, when she like shows up to the restaurant, and they're like, oh, he's married, like we have to get rid of Kate Hudson.
Really? What's her name?
Is that Paige Moss? Liz Stauber. She's credited as Gossipy Girl. And then there's Clea Duvall. Seth Green like hits on Clea Duvall quickly, and she like shuts him down. Selma Blair, I don't even think speaks in this. Like, there's just a shot of Selma Blair at the party.
No, she does. I think she does. It's the scene when Mike Dexter is like, "Oh, I heard you guys like really like really had a crush on me or whatever," and she's just like, "Yeah." Then you said we were like ugly sluts or what? It was something kind of like very degrading.
Yeah,
and he's like, I never said that. I think she's one of those characters.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, so many people in this movie, but I think it's a really fun ensemble movie, and you've got Days Confused that's like very slow paced, like driving the car. This is like very manic, frenetically paced, and I do think it kind of captures like what a high school party is like. Everyone's just bouncing around, talking to everybody. And the camera literally will like zoom through and like find the next people that we're going to talk to. It's a lot of fun. Yeah, it hasn't aged super well, like you said. There's some like really creepy stuff with Ethan Embry. Seth Green plays like this guy who is like this white kid who's like very into rap culture and uses like a black dialect in an extremely offensive way. Yeah, and that has not aged well. But also, you like texted me, you were like, "This is not aged well," and I'm like, "Yeah," but it also hasn't aged well. That like people, that is very realistic. Like you might watch it now and be like, "No way, people acted like that." But in, like
I did. The
late '90s, like East Coast, West Coast rap was like had kind of died down, but like Eminem was starting to come up. There were a lot. There were way too many white guys acting like that. And he does kind of learn in the movie to like be himself.
Be myself.
Yeah. But yeah, that definitely, that if you turn it on, that might hit you first as being like, oof.
And there's kind of some like homophobic stuff in this movie, big time. Like even the Mike Dexter like Charlie Crozmo like storyline where it's like, hey, let's get back at him by like taking like pictures of him with a dude that we can like blackmail him with. This very, very problematic. Also, 0 parents in the entire graduation scene. No parents whatsoever.
Yeah. Like we said, it's either like all parents or 0 parents in these movies, and this is a 0 parent movie.
This is even the end when Jennifer Love Hewitt's like, "Oh yeah, I talked to your dad. He said he would be here." I was like,
"Yeah." No one came to see Ethan Embry off to like go to Boston.
Dude's leaving for 7 months basically, and they're just like, "Yeah, we don't care to see you go."
Also, I'm sorry, Ethan Embry and Jennifer Love Hewitt, but your little long distance last day of high school romance is not more important than seeing Kurt Vonnegut speak at a workshop. Like, get on that train, Ethan Embry.
That's what you're up. So you're like, I would not leave that. Yeah.
Some of these, looking back on some of these things, when it's like when people are now like this one hit me, and just recently I was watching an episode of Gilmore Girls, and this guy had like offered Lorelai Bowie tickets, and she was like, "Oh, I really hate the guy, so I'm not gonna go." And I'm like, "No, go see David Bowie, please. Like, you don't have that much time left with him." Oh, it was John Hamm, by the way. John Hamm offered her David Bowie tickets, and she turned him down.
Yeah, so you would not turn down Kurt Vonnegut to
for Jennifer Love Hewitt? I'm sorry, no, it's not gonna work out. They're not gonna stay together.
That was another thing too, because like the ending, also kind of like American Graffiti, it has like the ending titles, like what they ended up doing. And what I found so weird is they couldn't pick a time frame of like the characters. So it's like with Mike Dexter, it's like, oh, he went on and did this and like kind of became like a loser basically. Troy Korsmo like ends up being like this huge software engineer and dates a model. But then like with Lauren Ambrose and Seth Green, it's like, oh yeah, they broke up, then had sex in the bathroom, now they're back together. And you're like, wait, that's just like 5
minutes into the future.
Like 5 minutes in the future, we're looking like decades in the future, the other two. And then with Jennifer Love Hewitt and Ethan Embry, it's just kind of like, oh, like they wrote each other every day when he was at school. I'm like, did they? Did they last? Did they get like? You never said they get married or anything. It's just like, oh yeah.
Also, it's 98. You guys can like email each other. Like you don't have to write letters. Like the internet is there, especially on your college campus.
That was another note I made. I was like, wow, remember when computers used to be nerdy? Like they're making jokes like, are you just gonna go home and like be on your computer? I'm like, yeah, what's the deal with that? Like that's what
guess what, man? In 10 years, everyone's gonna have one in their pockets and they're gonna be obsessed with them.
Like it's funny like a list like what is considered like nerd culture or uncool when you're like, cool, we do that every day now. Like certain things, like how like even just in terms of like comic book culture and like how pop culture has become like, some people would say more nerd centric, if that's the correct way, but like where like comic books are now like a big huge thing, when like back then that's a nerdy thing to like read comic books, and at least in terms of a film world, reading comic books, being on the computer was like a nerdy thing to do, and now it's just like that's the mainstream. Any other thoughts on Can't Hardly Wait?
No, I mean, I think it's one of those things, you and I both, it's one of those movies that hit us. It came out before we were teenagers, but I feel you and I both like got access to it around our teenage years.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those, if you went back as a 16-year-old right now and watched this movie, you might not be able to connect to it whatsoever.
No.
Who knows? I think these movies are so dependent on when you see them.
It's very of its time. I mean, I would put it in comparison with Empire Records for me, in terms of like a time capsule of the era. And also too, it's a film, I like this one more than Empire Records, but it's also a film where you're just like, you realize what it's trying to be, but it's not fully getting there. Like it's trying to be the One Crazy Night of like Dazed and Confused and American Graffiti, but it's just not fully reaching those heights.
Yeah, and I think, and we talked about this with Linklater, I think it's because these characters are a little too cartoonish. Like they never feel fully real in the way that Dazed and Confused feels completely authentic and earnest, and like those are people that you know, kind of thing. Moving
into 2010s, we're skipping 2000s with two movies I really like. But first up, we got Dope, directed by Rick Famuyiwa. He's a Nigerian-American director. He also directed a good movie called The Wood, which also fits in this kind of category, coming-of-age movies, of a three guys return for their friends, or three guys return because one of them's getting married, and they're looking back on their childhood of growing up in, I think they're in Inglewood as well, in The Wood. Dope's about, it's this young man Malcolm and his two friends, Jib and Diggy. And they're we're talking about this nerd culture we said and can't hardly wait, where these three are kind of these considered nerds or geeks who are very focused on their schooling, but they're into like 90s hip hop, and they're into kind of punk rock bands, and kind of into like, I think anime, like they're into a lot of different things, into technology. And Malcolm is he's applying for college, and his dream school is Harvard University, but he's this black kid from Inglewood who kind of has it's going to be difficult to get in because he's kind of being seen as like this outsider by them. And so he's applying for that, but while it's happening, him and his three friends go to a party because they befriend this guy named Dom, who's this drug dealer. And at the party, there is a raid and people are coming in to people are coming in to get the drugs, and Dom puts the drugs in Malcolm's bag, and Malcolm unknowingly takes it, and he kind of gets tied up in this whole like kind of drug dealing scheme basically, and ends up having to sell the drugs to make the money for the lead drug dealer. I really like this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I've always liked this movie. It's very stylish, but it has a lot of heart, and it definitely takes a lot of the stuff I've been talking about in terms of the tropes, and kind of it plays them a little bit, puts them in this more like high stakes game. And I know we're talking about how low stakes are better, but like Dope feels like it's a mix of a coming of age movie, but also kind of just a little, I don't know, I won't say it's an action film, but there's definitely like action moments in it that are done incredibly well. What were your thoughts on Dope?
Yeah, I love Dope. I haven't revisited it in a while, but I saw it a few times right after it came out, and there was a lot of buzz around it. And it does feel really fresh, and I think it's, like you said, it takes the tropes and kind of plays with them. I think one of the things it really plays on is the idea that like the lovable kind of nerd character that especially John Hughes created, when you do take him and put him somewhere that can be a little bit more dangerous, like Inglewood, like it is more dangerous for him to kind of flaunt his nerdiness in this neighborhood that he grew up in. And it's something that comes into play that he's often written off as a nerd kind of in his area. And he does know some of the local drug dealers and some of the local gangs, but they all kind of write him off as a nerd. And kind of what you, in the end of the movie, his letter that he sends to Harvard is kind of like, hey, I can be both. Like I can be smart about, I got roped into this drug deal stuff, and I did it the smart way. I did it my way, and I made it work. So it's a very unusual lesson for this kind of movie, but I think it is one of those movies, and I think it's the highest compliment you can give as an adult making these movies, is to just make the teens feel absolutely real and absolutely capable of anything. Yeah. Like it does not talk down to these characters, and it doesn't talk down to the audience in any way. And I think that feels really fresh.
Yeah, I think with Dope and with a few films we're going to talk about, one film we're going to talk about next, and also just kind of the month, is that once we get into kind of these things like Dope and like Edge of 17, where the movies are smarter. It's never looking down on the kids that are in the film. And it doesn't fully feel like, not all of them feel like they're written by an adult who's like trying to like redo the things that happen in their life. It feels very authentic of what someone would go through.
Yeah, and I think we'll talk about this more when we do talk about John Hughes, but I think a lot of that owes back to John Hughes, where he was kind of the person that was like, I'm gonna treat these teenagers like adults for sure. Yeah. And so a lot of the movies now that are stronger take all the strengths from a John Hughes movie, but then also recognize all the tropes that are kind of outdated and play on those. And so he, in a way, like the positives and the negatives of his movies have come to both positively influence what we're putting out now.
Yeah, because when you're talking about like for example, the parental trope, where like his Malcolm's mom is present in this movie, but there's no tension between the two. She's a single mother who like drives a bus and like provides for her kid. So there's no tension between them, but she's also not really an absent parent. She's working a lot to help pay for their life, but it doesn't do the whole like Rebel Without Cause thing or American Graffiti where they're not present.
And we have an adult figure kind of presented to us as an antagonist. But it's really, I really like the way they do it, because it's not cartoonish. It's not like, it's not like the principal and Ferris Bueller like digging around the house. Like it feels like a very realistic person. I mean, the whole world in this movie feels very real and very well realized. But that character specifically, I really like, in that he is. It's even weird to call him like an antagonist, but there is some conflict with him. Yeah. But he's a very realistic person. But then there's other parts of the movie that are like feel a little outlandish, like the run-in with the rich kids gets a little like slapstick. It's fun. It's really fun movie overall.
And also, like I forgot all about who was in this film when watching it. Zoe Kravitz is in it. Lakeith Stanfield, not a big part, but he's like the bully who keeps stealing his shoes.
Yeah.
Like I was like, oh, Lakeith's in this movie. Great cast. I love the visual style of it. I think as a director who isn't talked about as much, Rick Famuyiwa is just a great director in this genre. He's done it a little bit, I think, with The Chi as well on TV. He did he did 2 episodes of The Mandalorian. Like, he's a guy who, and for some reason, Dope is the last film he directed. Like, he hasn't directed anything since as a film.
He's been like in contracts with DC for a while, and
he was trying. Yeah, he was supposed to do Flash at one point, but yeah, for a guy who was able to take a kind of a coming of age story in the '90s with The Wood, and then now with Dope, is that he was able to like keep the same heart and realism I felt like that was present in that movie, and then do it like 2 decades later.
Yeah, and it feels very fresh, and it feels very realistic. Like, the visual style and everything feels current. Like, it's one of those. We've talked a lot about, if you set it in the past, how to make that feel right. And and it's hard to do one that's set in the present and feel absolutely current and fresh and young. And this one does.
And now on to The Edge of 17. Thomas, what is The Edge of 17 about?
The Edge of 17 is about a young girl named Nadine, played by Haley Steinfeld, who is going through a very tough time. It literally, I think the opening line is like, I'm going to kill myself. But her best friend, who is played by Haley Lou Richardson, hooks up with her twin brother, who she does not get along with whatsoever, and they start dating. And Nadine goes into this like spiral because that was her only friend in the world. That was the only person she socialized with, period. Yeah. And she just doesn't know what to do with herself afterwards. And I love this movie. I saw it, I think like opening weekend in theaters, because I had read this incredible review in Variety that was like, this is the teen movie. And it does it very well. I've seen it 3 times now, and I've grown to appreciate what it does do very well. Which is it's almost like a twist. I don't want to call it a twist in the movie, because it's something that just kind of comes eventually over the movie. But it opens with Nadine narrating the first act, and the narration goes away. And what you come to realize throughout the movie is she is an extremely self-centered person. And throughout the movie, you slowly start to get the lives of other people around her. But for the first like half of the movie, we're only seeing her, and we're not seeing anybody else when she's not around. And I think that what it does incredibly well is it shows how self-centered we all are as teenagers. Like, and it's hard not to be, but like, everything is about you. You know, you're experiencing life. Your life is coming at you like incredibly fast, and it's that everything is bigger than you, and everything has to be about you. And what this movie does really well is it drops us in with her and says, like, she's the narrator. Listen to everything she says. And as we watch the movie, we slowly start to realize that, like, she's wrong about a lot of things. She's formed the wrong opinions about her mom after her dad's passing, about her brother, the way that her brother lives. And she's very like shut off from other people emotionally. She's not good at like detecting other people's emotions, and she only acts on her own. Yeah. And so it makes it sound all kind of twisty, and it's not really presented as a twist, but the way the movie goes along, we come to realize by the end of it, we realize, like, with her, that she needs to be more open to other people's viewpoints and other people's experiences. And I think what's really strong about this movie is there's never a moment in the beginning, like a Christmas Carol, and it's like, this is Scrooge and he doesn't care what anyone thinks. Like, they never give us that. We have to realize it over the events of the movie and kind of go with her. And I think it captures something about the teenage experience that, like, nothing else has really gotten, in that it's like, we're all kind of assholes when we're teenagers, but it's not awful. We're not awful people, but we need to, like, listen to other people and recognize what other people are going through.
That's a good catch. And when you bring it up, you're right. Is that I'm thinking back of as the movie progresses, she begins to find out more about, like, her teacher, and like the scene when she walks into his home and she's like, "Oh, that's a baby." He goes, "Oh, how'd that get here?"
Woody Harrelson's amazing.
Woody Harrelson's amazing. Even to the point of, like, he's like, I get 20 minutes every day to not deal with kids. and you're coming here every day to talk to me. Let me have my time. And she's just like, but this is a me problem. I need help with like what's going on with me. And yeah, she's at first very unaware of the lives of the people around her. And you get like you're right, you get little things as you go on, like when she goes to the guy that kind of has a crush on her, and she's like, oh, like, you're rich. Like, he goes, yeah. Did I tell you? She's like, no. He's like, I always try to tell everybody. It's like, maybe because she was always kind of like talking and not really. And and also too, when bring that up, she never really, when he first talked to her, she never really asked questions to him. Like, she lets him ask the questions to her, and it's just kind of like, I don't really care.
Yeah, there's a scene where she's like, tell me about yourself, and he's about to start, and she's like, wait, let me guess. And she like lists off all this stuff about his parents. But even this last time rewatching it, even in the editing, early on in the movie, it's cut to just be, if she's in the scene, we're there, and then when she leaves, we leave. Yeah. And then the editing kind of slowly starts to let the scenes breathe, where she'll like leave the scene and we'll get to see how the other character reacts to her when she's out of the room. Yeah. It's really, really subtly done, but I think it's really strong in creating this, like, it gets you into her bubble. We all have these bubbles when we're teenagers, and the movie is really good at like getting you into her bubble and then popping it on both of you later on in the movie.
What genre tropes are in this? Like, what other genre tropes are in this movie?
I mean, there's absolutely the like parent relationship. Very early on, we're told that she's always been tight with her dad. Her dad is just presented as this like way too amazing guy. Like, you're watching the movie and you're like, this guy can't survive this movie because he's too good of a father. But she's never gotten along with her mom, and her dad always was kind of the mediator. And then her dad dies very early on in the movie, and we see just this rift between her and her mother and her brother, because she always felt like her dad was the only one who got her. So through a lot of the movie, she and her mom just cannot see eye to eye whatsoever, which is something we've been talking about. And like mentor figures, not a lot of the ones we've talked about here have them, but there are throughout the genre. If you were to dig deeper, there are a lot of these like mentor figure tropes, and the Woody Harrelson character really plays on that. Like, throughout the movie, all he does is he's just kind of like, I don't want to hear it. I don't care. Maybe if you were just nicer to people, you wouldn't be having these problems. But then slowly you start to realize, like, oh, they're actually really good friends. There's this great moment where he's like, she's really upset, and he's just like, you're my favorite student. And she's like, wait, really? And he was like, I don't know. It felt like the thing to say at the time. But it also plays on, I think, our ideas of the kind of like cliques and stuff. Yeah. Because we come to, like, she's like, I'm a nerd. My best friend is a nerd. My brother's a jock. Like, these things don't mix. We're separate. Yeah, we're separate. And then you find out later on that she's the one who's kind of doing that to herself. Like, no one's really excluding her. She's doing it to herself. And that there are all these kind of like weird, like, she ends up, one of the last shots is like she ends up with the love interest, and he introduces her to his like group of like filmmaker buddies. Like, there's all these other things outside of being like a jock or a nerd. And she's just like shut herself off from all of it. Yeah, it's like she's a character from like the Hughes world who's coming into the modern world of like teens, if that makes sense. Like, it's like she's like trying to be this like Ally Sheedy and Breakfast Club type character in a way where she just shuts herself off from everyone else there. And they're not accepting to her in that movie at first. And then this movie, it's like, no, we're like, it's cool. You can come to the party. We don't care. Like, yeah. I love there's this moment with Woody Harrelson again where she's like, I'm an old soul. I listen to old music. I wear old clothes. All they do is sit on their smartphones all day. I'm just not meant to be around these kids. And Woody Harrelson's like, have you ever just thought that, like, of not being a shitty person, they might be friends with you? Yeah, it's like she's created these kind of images in her head of what, like, of the teen life she should be having, if that makes sense. And the shift, because all these movies, I haven't really brought this up in this conversation, but it's like all of them are going through a shift in their lives in some way. That's what causes the coming of age story. It's the applying to college, it's the leaving town, it's the big event the big race or whatever,
And with this, it's the shift moment is when her best friend sleeps with her brother, where that forces her to reassess kind of everything in her life. And at first she continues down the path of what she like how she was acting before, but she realized she has to kind of grow up and mature to understand like what's happening. And that's when you're talking about where she has to realize that other people around her, like, yeah, like she's thinking her brother is just this terrible person, but in reality, she forgets that like he has so much stress put on him because of like he's now the man of the house because the father died. Okay, real quick rundown of the genre tropes that we've kind of sometimes kind of hinted at, maybe not talked about completely, but a couple of the ones. Conflict with parents has kind of been the running theme of a lot of these, or like you're saying, the absence of parents. Sexual repression, very very big in say Rebel Without Cause, and I think later on in even a little bit in like Edge of 17, where like she's wanting to have it's also this, it's like a sexual repression and sexual awakening, where like
there's definitely some weird energy where she's like jealous of her best friend for like having a boyfriend, but also the boyfriend is her brother, so that makes her feel weird. Like there's definitely some energy in there for sure too.
And she's kind of like trying to, because of that, like thinks she has to have sex to like almost be on the same level as the friend in a way. So she's like trying to get attention from some guy who works at the pet store.
Yeah. And then there's the question of like, does she want a hookup or does she want a relationship? And
exactly.
Yeah, it's all really, I think it's all handled really well.
We haven't really discussed this really, but feeling trapped and wanting to escape is a big theme in this genre. I mean, with Last Picture Show, that was a big thing. I think even a little bit with American Graffiti. I think with Breaking Away, it's the same thing of like, what is my purpose? Am I just going to stay in this town?
Yeah, I mean, even Rebel Without a Cause, they go and like make their own home kind of thing.
Yeah. Where it's like, and they and that scene particularly, they're essentially like making jabs at their parents because they're like talking about, oh, you don't want kids, they're loud and noisy and they just bother you. I would drown them in the pool, or like very like dark, and you're like, oh. They really feel like their parents don't care about them at all. Making an important decision is a big thing of this genre, with the college decision being kind of the easiest one. One thing we didn't say about Dope that they bring up, and I think was a very I don't know if it's a trope. I think Dope handles it nicely, but it's the idea of like a college essay.
Yeah,
which is like very apparent in so many of these movies, especially in the modern
Spectacular Now. It's like the kind of narrative device. It's like continuing to work on your college essay.
Me and Earl and the Dying Girl also does the similar thing where I think it's him. He's telling the story of him and his friends, and that's the kind of like you're saying the narrative arc the narration that you're hearing. But with Dope, it smartly doesn't do that. I'm not saying it's not it's a bad thing to do, but Dope does it in a way where it's not just the overarching narration, but it's the ending kind of realization where he's putting into words what he's learned in the movie. Questionable movies. I'm gonna ask you, and you tell me if these are considered coming of age movies. Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Any of them.
Yeah, I think that is, in as much as Carrie, the telekinesis is an example of like puberty. I think Spider-Man is probably the great, like, because not a lot of the superhero stories, they're grown, but like the big thing that sets Spider-Man apart is he's a teenager. And his powers are puberty. He's becoming a man and he doesn't know how to handle his new physicality. I mean, I think the first Sam Raimi really captures that the best, like the awkwardness of it. And, the scene when he's in his room and he's all of a sudden got muscles. You're like, oh, that's a metaphor for puberty, like 100%.
Back to the Future.
Yeah, I think if you take them as a whole, but the first one especially is about understanding your parents. And I think what Back to the Future does really well, I've always heard the story was like Bob Gale was like, if I went to high school with my dad, would we be friends? Yeah. And I think if you boil down Back to the Future, one of the main like lessons of it is you have to remember that your parents were your age once too, and maybe that can help a teenager relate to them better. So I mean that it definitely speaks to like the parent relationships we've talked about. And then, if you take the rest of them, it's about learning to be more responsible and learning to be an adult. And especially the second one, it's weird for Marty as a teenager to have to take responsibility for his kids. Yeah, I think it's definitely about growing up and seeing your parents in a new light and gaining more responsibility. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. For stats purposes, because it's a big question for our ending stats. Should we count Back to the Future as a whole or separate movies?
Let's count it as a whole, just for the stats.
Okay. Disney animated films. Someone put that on our the thing I posted on Facebook. They said all Disney animated films.
I don't know about all of them. Yeah, there's some that are for sure.
Like Peter Pan.
Peter Pan is one. I think Little Mermaid is one for sure.
Yeah.
Lion King.
Would Beauty and the Beast be considered one?
I don't think so. I don't think we're presented with Belle like needing any of the normal kind of like character needs that we're given as like teenagers.
But would you say the Beast is though?
Maybe. I don't know that we like. Belle is our like Belle is our protagonist. We're with her. Like he does mature, but also I don't think that's presented to us in a way that is like he's a teenager needing to mature as much as it is like an Ebenezer Scrooge or something like that.
Yeah. My last one. The original Star Wars trilogy.
Oh yeah, Luke starts out as such a snotty little teenager, and I was supposed to go pick up power converters.
Okay, there you go. Moving on to stats. Most popular films, all on our Letterboxd list, which I think has like 190 films.
I don't know that I'm going to be able to guess these. There's too many options to scroll through.
Lady Bird's number one.
Call Me by Your Name.
No, I think that was in the top 5 though.
Okay. I'm guessing all the Letterboxd ones here. Little Women.
No.
Booksmart.
No. 2 more guesses.
Moonlight.
Moonlight is one of them, yes.
Hey. I don't know. What's the last one?
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah. Least popular film. You won't get it. Coupe de Ville. A movie I have to see. I didn't get that. Movie I have to see. Highest rated films.
Call Me by Your Name.
No.
Lady Bird.
One of them. It wasn't Lady Bird. One of them is in the most popular films as well.
Moonlight.
No.
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man's number 1. Highest rated films on our list. The next 2 we have not discussed.
All right, yeah, you just gotta tell me these.
The 400 Blows.
Oh, okay, Letterboxd. All right, I see you.
We don't do foreign films on here because the clips. Well, we should probably do a little bit more of them, but the clips you will not understand.
We'll just act them out. Brandon and I will act them out in English.
We'll read the subtitles. Spider-Man and Spider-Verse is 4.4. 400 Blows is 4.3. The next one. I'll see if you consider this a coming of age movie, but it is a Disney animated film at a 4.2.
Bambi.
It's The Lion King. Did you say The Lion King?
I said The Lion King. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think The Lion King's definitely coming of age one.
Okay. Lowest rated films. I will say one of these. I know you were very disappointed in the adaptation of it.
Oh, I Love You, Beth Cooper.
I Love You, Beth Cooper.
Oh, what a letdown! I love that book. The movie is not good.
All 4 of these is 4 this time because they're all tied with a 2.2. I Love You, Beth Cooper is one of them. The other ones, because I don't think you'll get them. Hoot, starring Logan Lerman.
I love that book too.
Logan Lerman and a young Brie Larson. Crossroads, starring Britney Spears, Zoe Saldana, and Dan Aykroyd as Britney Spears' father, apparently. And then the bottom one, still a 2.2. I disagree with this. Grease 2. Right at the bottom of the list.
Never seen it.
I used to not like this movie, and then I was converted. And so I defend Grease 2. Okay. Most appearances. We didn't do this in the theater one, by the way. I forgot to do this.
I'll tell you, most appearances from the ones we watched. PJ Souls.
I didn't even look at PJ Souls. Hold on.
She was in Breaking Away.
She pops up very briefly. Oh man, it's PJ Souls.
I watched two PJ Souls movies today
because she's in Carrie.
Yep.
Would you consider Halloween a coming of age movie?
I don't know. I don't know that Laurie really like learns that much in that movie.
Yeah. It's not her. I will say one of them. So originally, these people were tied with 4 appearances, but Back to the Future has put someone up to 5 appearances.
Is it Leah Thompson?
Leah Thompson.
Nice.
With 5 appearances. Back to the Future, All the Right Moves, Some Kind of Wonderful, The Wildlife, and Space Camp.
Good for you, Leah Thompson.
The next person up behind her was Natalie Wood with 4 appearances.
Okay.
So yeah, surprisingly, not like it wasn't like Anthony Michael Hall or any of those. Like Estevez was, I think Estevez was close. I think the one that put him over is Mighty Ducks, a coming of age movie.
That's tough. I don't know.
It's an adult as the main character, and he has like a arc, but is that just a regular like dramatic arc?
Yeah, I think it's a regular arc. I don't think the kids have enough of an arc to say they're coming of age.
That would have put Estevez up there because he was in like The Outsiders, Breakfast Club, St. Elmo's Fire. So yeah. Okay. Biggest year, stats wise.
2016.
No, it's in the 80s.
Oh, I have no idea.
Okay. 1985.
What
I
we
think
got
it was
there?
10 movies.
Wow.
Let me get
era.
yeah, exactly. So 1985. We got Breakfast Club, Mischief, Vision Quest, The Sure Thing, The Last Dragon, 7 Minutes in Heaven, St. Elmo's Fire, Weird Science, Real Genius, and Teen Wolf.
Wow.
There you go. 85. Like nothing was close. Like nothing I think went over like 6, and I think it was at 10 for 85. Yeah. Crazy. 85, big year. We'll talk about that on our John Hughes episode at the end of the month. Last mentions, movies that we haven't discussed that should get a mention real quick.
I just want to shout out like a couple more recent ones. I think we're in a really nice like wave of modern coming of age movies. Yeah. Booksmart is incredible. I think it captures like Gen Z the best of any movie, and it's like ridiculous. It's not trying to be like this is what teenagers are like, but also in doing that, it does feel like the most authentic to what they're like, which I really loved. Mid-90s, I loved that movie. It felt like the only movie so far that's like captured like my time period, really. Like that's the one that's closest to what like my experience at that age is like, because it's set in like middle school in like the late 90s. 8th Grade is fantastic. And then a little bit further back, Kings of Summer is a movie I really enjoy, and way back I think they both came out the same year, but both really good at just kind of capturing the feeling of like summer and the aimlessness of it, but in a fun way.
Yeah, I love both of those films way back in Kings of Summer. You're right, they both came out in 2013, as did A Spectacular Now, which
is also a great coming of age movie. I think
another one. Yeah, I concur on Booksmart and 8th Grade and those films. I love Booksmart. Booksmart was like weirdly, when I watched it, I was like, oh, that was kind of me. Like it was the point. That was the point where I'm like, I wasn't much of a partier when I was in high school, and I was like more focused on grades. And so when those characters find out how like we're focused on grades, like we're not going to parties, and they find out all people who go to parties are like into big high school, like into big colleges, I was like, oh, that was my experience. When I found out, like,
I love that moment when she's like, I studied and I'm going to a great college, and they're like, yeah, we all got into good colleges. It's like, it's so funny.
Like, where'd you go to? We're going to Harvard. What? And I was like, oh man, that was a lot of people that I thought about that in high school, I was very negative, and they were like,
yeah, isn't Billy Lord like, oh yeah, I'm going to Yale. It was my backup school.
And I was like, oh, so Booksmart, and that was like weirdly it captured.
Billy Lord is so good in that movie. She's incredible.
It's a great cast. It's Olivia Wilde. I'm really excited to see what she does as a director after that film. Also, I mean, I'll shout out Little Women. We're going to talk about Lady Bird later in the month with a solo episode, but Little Women's up there. I really like Mud with McConaughey with Ty Sheridan. I'm going to throw out an older one that we didn't discuss. Find an older one we didn't discuss. I mean, Last Picture Show we talked about before, and you said earlier. I'll throw out Stand By Me. If you haven't seen Stand By Me, that's a good one. Oh, this is what I'll say that I just recently watched. Juice with Omar Epps and Tupac Shakur, directed by Ernest R. Dickerson. Really good movie. Like Dickerson was able to make almost like a Hitchcock film, but also kind of a coming of age movie like set in essentially kind of in Harlem is what it is, of these four friends who kind of end up going separate, like they end up getting involved in crime and kind of go separate ways. Then it's a great film, streaming pretty much everywhere on Prime, Netflix, and HBO Max right now. So where should people start? It's a big genre. It's a big genre.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough to pinpoint exactly when. I think it's best to, if you really want to study the genre, I would say go back to a movie that you saw when you were like 15 and that stuck with you, especially if you haven't been back to like revisit it, or even if it's one you watch a lot and you just you go back and look at it from like a genre studies standpoint, and then kind of build off of there. But I definitely think you need to start with the ones that felt formative to you, because I think that's where you'll find the strongest connection.
Yeah.
And it's interesting as an adult to look back at those and see how they affected you in your growth. I mean, there's definitely stuff from Almost Famous that I've like taken into my life. You know what? They're because we're uncool, man. I'm like, I'm always around. I'm uncool. Like, I think you'll start to like recognize the life lessons you took from, like, whether it was like Clueless was your movie, or like, Now and Then, or Sandlot. Like, go back and rewatch them as an adult and see like what struck you as a kid, what strikes you now as an adult. I think that's the best way to really like approach these, and then you can start digging a little bit deeper into this list of ones that might be from that same time period or might be from the same writers, that sort of thing.
What would be the 3 films for you if you did that you would go back to?
Definitely Almost Famous. I think probably Dazed Confused. I found Dazed, like I said on our Linklater episode, I like found Dazed Confused when I was around a high school freshman, which is, when it's, I think, what it's really kind of aimed at.
Yeah.
Probably Footloose.
Okay.
I was into Footloose when I was really young. I'm not really sure why. I caught it on TV one day and I was like, this is awesome. But it does kind of capture that, like, being in a really small town and being like, oh man, I gotta go like anger dance my frustration because this town is so quiet. Like, I felt that deep in my soul.
Yeah, I would say American Graffiti for me. I would probably say Sandlot as well, and then Almost Famous. Those are the 3 I would also say. So guys, we have a couple of good episodes planned for you this month. One is to be announced, I will say right now, because we got 5 weeks in July. There's some ideas we're tossing around that we'll come back to. Hopefully the plan is next week we're going to do Splendor in the Grass for our classic film, and then I don't know what week it's going to be, but we're going to be doing Lady Bird as kind of our contemporary film. And then our final episode of the month will be on John Hughes. So and that's a deep dive. Well, that's going to be a hard one because he has a lot of films that he was involved in. I think he's the biggest filmography of anyone we covered, by the way. So we're going to have to pick and choose some of the stuff we cover and not cover. Mm-hmm. So I think he directed 8 films, like wrote like almost upwards of 20 films. So it's going to be difficult. So yeah, guys, make sure you subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher. Give us a rating, give us a review. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and read our stuff on Medium. Yeah, I think that's it. Thomas, as always, thank you so much for coming on. And we got a fun month of coming of age movies to discuss.
Yeah.
And guys, thank you so much for listening. We hope you listen to more episodes soon. Bye.
like we said, I think low stakes are key here. I think
Yeah.
there's this weird thing when you are a teenager, everything feels so heightened, but it's not for the most part. Like, you know, something as I think that's the key is like when you're older and you're writing these movies about being a teenager, you think like, oh, you got to have stakes because movies have to have stakes.
Yeah.
And what you forget is like just how important, like if you're John in this movie, finding out that someone in the town has a faster car than you, just how important that is to you when you're a teenager. Like that is huge. That is everything. So you don't need, like if we're talking Rebel Without a Cause, you don't need gunfights with the cops and driving off of a cliff. Just needing to beat that guy on the strip tonight, like that is everything when you're a teenager. So the stakes are already so heightened when you're that age that like I think that the key to really making an authentic teen movie is like keeping the stakes low, because you just feel everything so much more when you're a teenager.